In this video, I'm going to give you the ultimate pitch deck guide, but I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to explain it from an investor's perspective. Quite often, these pitch deck guides end up becoming part of the founder experience, and they're explained to you as a founder, but I'm going to flip the tables, and I'm going to tell you what an investor is thinking, because you need to get in their heads. You need to empathize with the investor, especially if you're raising pre-seed or seed funding. This is going to be important. Now, before we continue, let me give you my background here on how we got to this point in time. I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. That just means I failed a bunch of times for your benefit, because out of all those ventures that I've raised funding for, and I've raised over 9 figures in my day for my startups, other people's startups, as well as for different investment funds, I've made so many mistakes, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes. I've pitched literally hundreds of times. I've forgotten how many times I've pitched with all different types of startup decks, and all that's come together for the ultimate pitch deck guide. If you like this type of content, please do me a favor, like, comment, subscribe, share with all your friends. It really helps the channel and gives me the feedback that I need to continue making these types of videos. Let's jump in. One of the first things that you need to understand is what happens when you go from pitch deck finally to investment. There's an investment journey, a funding journey that you are going to go on, and it starts with the investor receiving 100 pitch decks. The investor's gotten 100 pitch decks, and they open those pitch decks to take a look, and you are in a screening process. The investor's primary goal is to make a decision, not if they want to invest or not, but if they want to take the next meeting. So out of 100 decks, what happens is that 20 or 30 of those founders are going to be invited. Those startups will be selected and said, hey, we want to have a meeting with you, and we want to see a live pitch. After that, 2 to 6 of those 20 to 30 that pitch will be selected to be socialized. That means the investor made a decision to take a few steps forward. If they're part of a VC, they brought in other partners, and everybody gets in on it, and the investor is going to ask you to help them socialize the opportunity, because most likely that investor is not going to make the decision themselves. They want other people to chime in, and that's the socialization process. Then from there, after everybody gets on board, you go through due diligence, and 1 to 3 companies will go through due diligence where they say, all right, here's the letter of intent. We want to crack open the hood, we're going to look behind the curtain, and let's start divulging information going back and forth to really get into the numbers and understand, does this founder, does this startup check all the boxes that we need to satisfy our investment requirements? That's due diligence. And then finally, 1 to 2 startups will get that check. Take a look. You've gone from 100 decks open to 1 to 2 of them actually receiving investment. I'm pretty sure the big guys like A16Z and Sequoia ARC program just receive so many more applications that they've got even bigger numbers and smaller percentages that finally get through to the last round. If you look at this journey, you're going to start to understand what an investor has to go through and the different types of pitch decks you need to be prepared for. Let's take a look at those pitch decks. First, you need a master deck. This is the central repository where all your slides are going to go. It's more like a business plan in slide format, and you do not show the master deck to other people because it's too overwhelming. Think of it like your pitch deck Bible, where you're going to drop all the slides and you're going to pull the different slides to make your life a little easier when you have to present the different decks that I'm going to show right now. After the master deck, you're going to start off with the screener deck. The screener deck is like an introductory deck that you upload online, and you put in a link and you send it over, and the investor wants to see whether they're going to sort you into that pile. Think of like the sorting hat in Harry Potter. They're going to sort you into the pile where they say, I want to take the next meeting. So they're screening, and that's the reason they see so many decks, but only a few are chosen. After that, you might have something called the first meeting deck. The first meeting deck is the deck that you're going to present live on Zoom, or you're going to be meeting in their offices, and this deck is going to be a little different because you're going to ask the investor what they need to see, because the investor probably has some questions in their mind and they need to see some more information. So it is a different deck, and you want to be ready for this. After is the socialization deck. Sometimes an investor will come to you, especially if they're working inside a firm with other partners, and they'll say, I'd like you to change your deck for this, this, and this. I'd like to see some more information here, make some adjustments because I'm going to socialize this. Sometimes that investor is the lead investor. That means they're going to do due diligence and probably write the biggest check, but they need your help to socialize that deck to the other investors that are going to come in the round. Many investors will say, come back to us when you have a lead investor. Well, you need to help that lead investor socialize the opportunity, and that's the reason this deck is going to be a little different. Then it's the due diligence deck. Now all the investors are on board, and they want to understand more details about the deal. This due diligence deck will have slides that have got more information. It gets a bit more complicated, such as your metrics and your projections, some analysis. Sometimes the investor will say, just send me the raw data in all your slides, and we want to apply our formulas to it. We want to put it through our process to really calculate what we we think this investment is worth. The due diligence deck is based on what the investor needs to see. Again, you're pulling from the master slide deck, and you're giving all the due diligence information that the investor wants. The point of this deck is to make it easy for the investor to process that information. It doesn't end there, though, because usually what happens is they want a decision deck or a final decision presentation where everybody gets on board. And by this time, you're probably exhausted because you've jumped through a whole bunch of hoops. But remember, the investor is making a decision. Once they write you that check, it's like a marriage. You're together for the next 10 years. And that's usually how long it takes. So they want to make sure that you have what it takes. And as I referenced before, it ticks off all the boxes because they're most likely accountable to limited partners or other investors, and they need to show the evidence of how they made the decision so they can continue raising more money or continue staying in the game and making money, which is what the investor needs to do to continue their livelihood in the career of venture capital or being any investor for that matter. But sometimes the investor is going to ask you for more technical information. I do this all the time. I'll bring in a technical expert and I'll say, hey, founder, send me your technical deck, show me your tech stack and all the information, engineering, what have you, and I'm going to bring in an investor because I'm not technical myself, and I'm going to have a technical person. It might be an investor with technical skills and background, or just might be a technical person that's going to advise me and sit on the same side of the table as all the investors and say, all right, technically speaking, this all checks out. So get ready for a technical deck, especially if you are a tech startup. They're going to expect you to build tech and make sure that you have the prowess, the know-how, the acumen, all the domain expertise. That's what this deck is for. Now, going in the opposite direction, you might need an FFA deck. FFA stands for Friends, Family, and Associates, but the A can also stand for Really Generous Angels. This deck is a little different because sometimes you present to investors that are not as sophisticated as VCs or professional investors that come from institutional capital. Not saying that these investors are dumb. I'm saying that they are not used to technical terms such as TAM, SAM, SOM, or maybe you have a safe note in there. All that stuff, they don't care. They just want to invest, and maybe they have experience investing in real estate or other more mainline traditional investments, and you want to get them in. So you're going to dumb down this deck and make it approachable and accessible for investors because you may want to take in some FFA checks before you go for the institutional round. Now, what happens if you're asked to pitch live? Well, you need a live pitch deck. Typically, this is the screener or first meeting deck, and all the copy is taken out of it except for some keywords, some bullets, some big figures, images, charts, graphs, shots of your product, etc. Because you're pitching live, think of it like a TED Talk or Steve Jobs giving an Apple event announcing a product. You want them focused on you and what you're saying. If you got so much text on your slides and they're having to squint and read it, especially if you're on stage, then you're going to lose them. You want them to focus on you, and your deck complements what you're saying. This is a different type of deck. Now, after that live presentation, they may want the full version with all the text, and that's okay, but make sure you understand a live deck is there to help you as a presenter when you're doing a live pitch. Now, going all the way back to the beginning of the process, sometimes I create an idea validation deck. This is just a deck with problem, solution, how it works, the size of the market, my expertise. And I'll often put a slide in there saying, we're not asking for any money right now. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to see if the investor understands my problem solution and everything I got going on, and they're open to me having a relationship with them in the future. Often they'll say, great, this makes sense. Thanks for sending it to me. When you need investment, and I'll say, I'm not raising right now, but I'll keep you posted. The idea validation deck is also great for customer discovery and to get potential customers. That's not all. Next is the crowdfunding deck. You might want to go out and do a Reg CF, put your deck online for retail investors, people who are online to come find you. One of the typical differences between crowdfunding deck and other regular decks, such as the screener deck, is that a crowdfunding deck will have a slide in the beginning with highlights. And that's because the form factor in which they're receiving this information, the investor, is a little different than scanning through a deck with dozens of inquiries coming in. They're going to come and they're going to see the site, maybe watch a video, and they want to see all the highlights, and that's going to help them continue and scan through the rest of your deck. And by this time, you're thinking to yourself, Ed, I've had enough decks. But there's one more, and we don't know what that is. That might be a deck that comes out of left field. I don't know. The investor might be asking you to present to potential licensing partners or potential syndication groups. Who knows? But you want to be prepared, and that's the reason we go all the way back to deck number 1. Make sure your master slide deck is ready to go, and you're constantly working on it. Now, let's break down arguably the most important deck that you're going to put out there right out of the gate, and that's the screener deck. And I've broken this list down from an investor's perspective in what is required, recommended, and optional. Don't worry, I'm going to speed through this, but I'm going to put all this information in the video notes. All the details will be there. Go check it out. The first slide needs to be a cover slide. What the investor wants to see is a no fluff one-liner. A one-liner that describes the industry, problem, solution, all wrapped up in one sentence so the investor can know where they are, what arena are they working with, or even in the same ballpark as they need to be. Don't use buzzy marketing jargon, fluffy words, because investors have seen it all. Make it easy for them and show them exactly what they're getting into right on the cover page. Do not waste that opportunity to make that first impression. If you're in e-commerce, say you're in e-commerce. If you're in Web3, say you're in Web3. Don't say, we're the future of e-commerce and decentralized and da-da-da-da-da. Don't worry about that stuff. Just make it plain and clear, help the investor out. Next required slide is the problem slide. And this is where you're going to share the industry and the scope and the severity of the problem. The investor wants to see a clear problem slide because they want to decide if this is a problem that they want to put their money into for a solution. They want to see how bad the problem is and how much it's worth to solve that problem because they're investors and they want to know, is this a big enough problem that's going to make me money? Now, quite often, the investor wants to invest in problems that they care about as well. Everybody has their investment thesis, especially angels. They've got a particular bent towards a specific type of problem. That's the reason your problem slide has to be super clear and get the investor's attention. Then you'll move on to the solution slide. This is required. This is your unique value proposition that flips the problem. What I mean by this, if you say in the $50 billion industry, 300 million people do things that are slow and manual, well, guess what? You're going to say, we've created a solution that makes everything fast and automated. It has to flip the problem. They need to know that you are solving for that problem. And this is where founders make a huge mistake. Their problem solutions and their solution statements are not aligned. And I hear investors say this all the time, is that if the solution does not directly relate to solving the problem, they're lost. They're gone. They're not going to invest. Now, your first recommended slide is the market validation. Why now? Not all investors want to see this, but it's pre-recommended. They're going to be thinking, why now? Why is this such a big problem now? Is it something that has just occurred because of a trend? Is there something new that's happening in the economic landscape? Or is this a future problem based on something that's going on right now that is going to create a problem that needs a massive solution? Those are really fun problems to talk about. The investor's going to ask themselves, why now? You need to give it to them in this slide. Then we move on to the product slide, highly recommended, and how it works. Make it simple. Think of it like Uber. All the user has to do is pick up their app, push a button, tell the location where they want to go, and the app says, here's when your driver's going to be there, and you pay right through the app. Simple, done like that. Explain it that way to the investor using this slide. Now here's an optional slide called market size. I happen to prefer this slide over the market validation slide, or sometimes I'll include both, because the market slide allows me to explain to them my bottom-up tam-tam-som calculation. This is where most founders make a mistake. They do a top-down calculation. Think of it like cybersecurity is a $2 trillion industry. If we take 1%, everybody's going to be rich. Investors not interested in that. They want to know you have the ability to calculate from the bottom up. That's doing analysis of how many users you think you have in your entire market that could demand your solution. And if you charge them the amount of money that you're projecting to charge them with pressure-tested assumptions in terms of your pricing, this is how much money you can make a year. And then you want to break that down into segments, and they want to clearly understand how realistic are you and what's your go-to-market strategy in the amount of market that you can capture out of that total addressable market. Think of it just as another test where the investor wants to know, do you as the founder have the chops to do this market analysis in the right way? Back to a required slide, the business model. The investor wants to know how you make money, and they want to know specifically how you're going to make money. And this is important today because gone are the days where you can tell an investor, oh, we're just growing our users right now. We're going to grow really fast and we'll turn revenue on later. That's not going to happen. They want to know how you make money. And the more you can explain to them, especially how you make money right now, and then you can also share this, how we're going to make money in the future. A lot of times investors want to know, how are you going to expand? And if you've thought that through, then the investor starts to think, wow, there's a lot of money to be made here, and this founder has figured out how they're going to do it. Here's an optional slide, the magic sauce. This is where you present the novel insight. If you can get the investor to go, huh, I didn't know that, or wow, I didn't think you could pull that off with some novel insight, guess what? You're in the driver's seat. You have a much better chance. But make sure it is magic. Make sure it is novel. Don't just tell the investor something that should be taken for granted. Give them something unique. That's how you want to use this slide. Therefore, it's optional. What's not optional is the competition slide. The investor wants you to tell them how you're different because they're automatically going to be assuming if this is a big enough and valuable enough problem, there are other founders, other startups that are trying to solve for it, and you need to explain to them. Do not tell them you are the first to do this and you're one of a kind and there's nobody else like you. The investor's going to cry, BS. They can sniff that a mile away. They're going to be thinking to themselves, someone else must have tried to solve this problem. And if so, what's different about you? What didn't work last time that you're going to do this time? Or if there are other startups in your space that have raised money, they're going to want to know, what do you know that they don't know, and why should they bet on you versus them? Which brings us to the next slide, optional, a competitive advantage slide. If you have created a competitive advantage that is a defense, there's defensibility built in. Maybe you've got a patent, or maybe you're entrenched somewhere. Maybe you've got network effects and you can prove it. You want to include this in the slide here. Show them what advantages you've created. Don't talk about the future competitive advantages. Talk about what you've already done to make them realize that you've acknowledged competition and you've done something about it, and now you have a competitive advantage. Another optional slide is a go-to-market strategy. Go-to-market strategies usually pop up during socialization or due diligence. Typically, if you've done a proper market validation, especially if you've done a market size slide and you're talking about your SOM, they're going to understand that you've got a clear go-to-market strategy. But if you've got something unique, you've got something that can truly show how you will scale, and it gives them that novel insight that I keep talking about, include that in this slide, but don't just talk about, oh, we're going to do sales. Well, of course, you're going to do sales. Everybody takes that for granted. Talk about how your sales are going to be scalable in a unique way. That's when you use this slide. Then we get to the founder slide. It is absolutely required. The investor wants to know the domain expertise. Remember, investors, especially at early stages, don't invest in startups. They invest in founders. They all assume your first idea is not going to work, but the right founders will start to iterate on that idea. And they're really concerned that if things don't work out, because startups are incredibly hard, how is the team gelling? Does the founding team have what it takes to work through challenges, pivots, iterations, all the different resistance factors that occur when you're trying to do something really special and disrupt a marketplace? That's what the founder slide is for. It answers the question, why us? The investor is going to be asking, why you? Remember, there are dozens of other founders most likely trying to solve the same problem. The investor wants to know why you. Explain it to them very clearly in the slide. Showcase your domain expertise. Talk about how your founding team is super awesome. You work together for a long time. You create so much value, and you've got this experience, and you can be trusted with their money. The optional slide after that is advisors and partners. Don't make a mistake of including advisors and partners that don't move the needle in terms of validation. In other words, only include the advisors and partners that are going to move the needle, that say you validated how important your problem solution and your team is, that the advisor wants to come on and join with you, that the partner is willing to sign on. If you say, I've got a partnership, and it's just a document that you've signed up for, and it says, okay, we're partners now with this technology company, that's not going to help. Don't put that on your slide. Only put the advisors that show that you are an impressive enough team to bring on these impressive advisors and showcase how much validation you already have for your startup. The next required slide is a traction slide, and you want to move this up if it's impressive. If you already have customers and you've already signed 180 letters of intent, or you've got 1 million people on your waiting list, or you've got 1 million people in your social media following, move that up. Sometimes I like to move that just right after the solution slide. I tell them my solution. I say, look, I already have 500,000 users, or we've already made $200,000 with this, so the solution is very clear. People are paying for it. But if you don't have that type of traction, just leave it here and talk about all the things that you have done and how fast you've done them. That's a total pro tip, because they want to know you can work fast, that you can go out there and generate that momentum. So have you launched your MVP? Have you tested it? Have you gotten all the feedback? What's the NPS score? Have you got people on a waiting list who have deposited some money for your future solution when you launch the real thing? Who knows what it is? Get the traction. It should be building over time, because a lot of investors will say, all right, you may not have the traction now, but I like everything else. Come back to me at those inflection points when you have the traction that's going to make me want to write the check. At that point in time, you say, all right, if I reach 500,000 ARR, or I reach 1 million monthly active users, you're writing me a check for $1 million. Investors are willing to have the conversation. They actually like it because everybody's clear on what they need to see. That makes the investor feel really good, because if you're willing to say, I will go out and get that to you and come back to you, they say, all right, now we're in business. Now we're working together to create a startup that everybody can benefit from. Next is the ask slide, totally required. The investor wants to know what type of check size that you want. And not only that, what are you going to use the money for? So you want to say, we are raising X funds for Y milestone in Z period of time. Let's say we're raising $1.5 million to reach 1 million users in 18 months. That's what you want to explain to them. And the check size is important, because they may only be able to write a $100,000 check and you're asking for $2 million. And that's not going to move the needle whatsoever. It's a drop in the bucket. Or they may be interested in writing a $2 million check and you're only raising $500,000, and they may say, come to us when you're ready to take a $2 million check. I've seen this happen before, especially with really quality startups. Now, here's the mistake you want to avoid. Don't put your valuation on this slide. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself and create a perception to the investor that you're never going to understand. In fact, if they ask you what your valuation is, this is my response, and it's reflected in this slide. I tell them, I'm not responsible for the valuation of the company. My responsibility is to create the best value possible and let the market decide. And I tell investors all the time, you probably have ways to value the company and decide, which is usually determined based on the percentage that they need to see. Because remember, think of it from the investor's perspective. They want you to keep going. And if you're going to be a baby unicorn in a rocket ship going to the moon, you're going to be doing an A round, B round, C round, putting all that dry powder in your war chest. And that's going to dilute the initial investors down every single round. So they're mostly concerned with the percentage and how can they see an exit that pays back all their limited partners and makes them the money that they promised to their investors. So leave the valuation conversation till later. Make sure they're all bought in, maybe experiencing a bit of FOMO, and then you can have that conversation. If you've already sold equity before that, then you can tell them our last round was priced at this, and you can have that conversation, start calculations from there. But don't put that in the ask slide and shoot yourself in the foot, because you might have valued yourself and put yourself way out of the market, and they think, no, this is not worth it, and they're going to shut you down right away. Or you might have even undervalued yourself, and they may be thinking, wow, this is a total steal, and you didn't know. That's the reason you want to have that conversation after. Don't put the valuation in the ask slide. Finally, it's the contact page. You want to put your contact information very clear so they know how to get a hold of you. They've got your email and all that stuff, but you just want to put your contact information and not make it confusing. Don't make it small and put it in the bottom right-hand corner like I see founders often do. And optionally speaking, you can put in a vision statement as a call to action. You can say, join us as we go and change the world, or join us as we go and save lives together. That's okay. I don't mind doing that whatsoever. On the last slide, put in some buzzy words, put in some visionary statements. That's going to be okay. Just make sure the contact is super clear. That's your last page, and that is required. Now, let me just say there are always exceptions. You can format your deck any way that you want. These are 16 slides, and some of them are optional. Some of them are recommended. There's always exceptions. You want to be comfortable with your deck because at the end of the day, you are the one pitching it. You have to have conviction and stand in front of the investor and take all the questions and fire right back and show them how formidable a founder you are. Like I said, just my opinion, always exceptions, but not really. What do I mean by this? I have a lot of founders come to me and say, Ed, we're different. And I go, what do I know? I've only raised X amount of dollars, and I've seen hundreds of startups, hundreds of pitch decks as a startup advisor, and I know the ones that have got funded. And I can tell you from the data, usually exceptions are far fewer than founders like to think. You are not that special when it comes to the hundreds of decks the investor wants to see, so make it as easy for them as possible. Every investor knows they want to find that special founder, so make your first entry into that investor's life as simple and concise as possible, and give it to them in a format that they're used to, that the whole industry is used to, and you're going to do yourself a lot of favors instead of saying, I'm special and I only want to talk to investors that understand my crazy convoluted pitch deck. Don't do that. Follow this format as much as you can. Finally, I want to end with some best practices when it comes to investor empathy. Why investors need to see these pitch decks in the format that I've suggested. First, try to keep every slide limited to 40 words. Literally cut and paste all the text off your slide, run it through a word counter, and get to 40 words. Try to challenge yourself. I like to do this because it challenges me to be far more concise. If there's a character limit, you'd be surprised what I can come up with. That's going to help the investor. Keep your section text on the slide, but make it small. In other words, if you're on the problem slide, make problem a small font in the top left corner or wherever you're going to put it so the investor knows where they are. That's going to help give the investors kind of a roadmap, because investors struggle and they get frustrated when they don't know where they are in the pitch deck. Start every slide with a one-sentence header. The investor wants to read the headline. It's like the ad for the slide. One-sentence header. Remember, you got 40 words that you're working with, so it's going to be pretty concise, and that helps the investor understand what is going on with the rest of the slide. Make it a one-sentence header. Make it super clear. I said this before. Don't put any marketing fluff or buzzy cliches in it. Investors have seen that all before. It just creates more friction, makes us have to work to get to the core message and get to the truth of the matter underlying all the fluff on top. You don't want to do that. That means you want to speak to the investor, not the customer. When you're speaking to the customer, you are going to use buzzy words. And also remember, it's not Shark Tank. You have to go in all Shark Tanky and say, we're here and put on this show, because that's for television. Investors don't need to see that. Just be very straightforward. Speak to the investor using their language that they understand so that they can relate to you and say, this is a founder. They can sit on our side of the table and we can work together. Every slide, 3 to 5 bullet points only as necessary, and keep those bullets to a minimum. If you're using my 40-word challenge, those bullets are going to be super tight and very effective. Now, this is where it's different. The founder slides need more bullets. Like I said, be generous with them. If you got domain expertise, for example, if you've got a CTO on the team, you want to use bullets that showcase their domain expertise in being technical. If you won a Nobel Prize or you've exited other startups, you've raised VC before, put all those bullets in. Don't be stingy on those bullets. Just keep them tight, like I said. Now, how do you know if your slides are effective? The text is going to stand on its own. Take out all the images, all the colors, and if the text doesn't make sense by itself and you need a picture to actually demonstrate what the slide is saying, then you've lost it. Make sure the text makes sense by itself, which means the images must align and amplify. Don't put an image in there just for an image sake. Don't put in stock art or something you got off Midjourney or generated off DALL-E just because you wanted a picture in there. It's kind of like filling awkward silent spaces in a conversation with just word salad. Doesn't help. It's worse if you put a picture that doesn't actually make sense with what you're trying to communicate. Forget that. Just be straightforward. I'd rather see a slide with just text than have an image that makes no sense whatsoever. With that being said, a great image is extremely powerful. So if you got the right image, make sure you use it. Now, if I'm an investor, I'm probably looking at 10 to 12 decks every single week. Therefore, I have the attention span this big. And that means you need to hit me with your information and help me make that sorting decision in 3 to 5 minutes. I've seen so many decks, I'm pretty sure I can tell where the deck is going to go right from the cover, problem, solution. I'm done. Takes me about 30 seconds to a minute, and if I want to read the rest of the deck, I will, and I use the rest of my 5 minutes. Understand, investors will not spend 30 to 40 minutes on your deck. You might be saying, but Ed, they're going to miss out on the $1 trillion opportunity. We're going to get to that. Remember, all those subsequent meetings are going to happen. Give them the goods right up front. Give them the appetizers they want to order. Everything else on the menu, you're going to get there. Just keep it in 3 to 5 minutes right out of the gate. Don't make the investor do work. That's what we're talking about here. If the investor needs to spend more time than they want to or put in more mental energy than they need to, they can't be bothered. They're busy. They're the investors. There's way more demand for capital than there is supply. So they're in a position of power. They can afford to be picky. So don't make them do more work than they need to. Think about it. If the investor only has 3 to 5 minutes, but they take 5 minutes just on one slide because they have to interpret all this information, an image, a graph that makes no sense whatsoever, they're just going to give up and say, moving on. Use data metrics and concrete facts to show traction. Don't give out general numbers. For example, if you say, we've generated $2 million in revenue, there's a difference if you generate $2 million in revenue over the course of 5 years through all these different product offerings and consulting where you're doing things manually, or if you generate $2 million and you grew 10% week over the last few months. You see the difference? Give the investor that detail and that data. Be truthful about it. Don't fudge the numbers. Don't embellish. Don't try to hide anything. Be as concrete as possible with your traction and use proper numbers. Another example of this is if you say 40% of our users really like our stuff. Well, if you surveyed 100 users, you can say out of 100 users, 40 said they like our stuff. And there's a difference if you surveyed 10,000 users or 100,000 users. Give them the data to illustrate the type of traction you've got and be truthful about it so they get excited that you're founders that can get that traction and keep going for future success. Now, have you heard of the mom test? That's when you go out and you get feedback like your mom is telling you and telling you the truth. I like to change it and say, get feedback from the rich mom test. Go and test your deck and your messaging and get feedback from people like they were rich moms, people with money. That's going to help you understand the investor perspective. Being clear and concise is all you. It is not the investor's fault if they don't understand your deck. It's not your advisor's fault if they don't understand the deck. That is all you. I've done so much work with founders in the past, and I've boiled down their decks and made it clear and concise where everybody understands. I've even shown it to investors, and other investors understand. And then I send the deck back, and they make all these changes, and they basically add 400% more words to everything because for some reason they're insecure or they're worried that the investor's not going to get the message. That's on you, not everybody else. So it is your responsibility. Giving you a reality check here. As a reminder, your focus is on the next meeting, not getting the investor to invest. They're not going to make that decision based on one pitch deck. As I've shown, they're going to want to see multiple pitch decks and have multiple conversations. Give them enough to focus on the next meeting. Do I want to call you as a founder and get that next meeting? That's what you should be understanding is going through the investor's mind. Now, when you get to that first pitch meeting, use the 80-20 rule. In other words, spend 20% pitching, but 80% talking. If you have 30 minutes, that's 6 minutes of pitching and 24 minutes of having conversation, which typically is how long an investor meeting takes, what I'm used to anyway. Now, the investor can decide to spend more than an hour with you. I love founders when they tell me, our meeting was set for only 20 minutes because that's what the investor wants, to have a natural out if that pitch is not going to be a yes, it's going to be a pass. But I love it when founders come to me and they say, wow, we were only slated for 30 minutes and we end up talking for an hour and a half. That's a really good sign. That's what's going to get investors to stay, not an hour and a half of you droning through your pitch deck and reading every slide, boring the investor out of their mind. And don't worry, decks are going to get more complex as they go, as I've shown you through all the stages. If you get to the technical deck, show them everything you've got, show all the technical details because that's what they want. Send your white paper along with it. You will have chances to show all the information. Decks will get more complex, don't worry about it, but that's near the end of the process. Keep the upfront decks as simple as possible. And finally, this is my disclaimer. This is only in my humble opinion. I've had many founders come to me and say, but Ed, this other advisor told me to do this. Or they say the investor trashed our deck and ripped it apart and say, we need to see your deck this way. Everybody has an opinion. I have an opinion, you have an opinion, the investor has an opinion. Take what you can, learn from it. If you start to see trends, make the adjustments. But if you ever get advice counter to what I have to say, then just look at where that advice is coming from and make your decision from there. You may come up with a whole bunch of techniques. This video could be obsolete in a year. I don't know, and I don't really care. I just want everybody to get as much information as possible. So use that information wisely and understand everybody has an opinion, but it's up to you to decide what you do with all those opinions. That's all I got. Like I said, check the video description for the notes and check out this playlist I'm going to put on the screen right now because I do pitch deck reviews on this channel and you're going to see me put all this advice, all these best practices into action with real pitch decks, with real founders trying to raise real money. I hope you enjoy this. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe. Your feedback is tremendously important and I will see you in the next video.